it just became worse. I ended up getting very bad bronchitis because I must have gone down with some bacteria. And then I ended up getting systemic edema, which is where your whole body swells up. And my face was swollen. Doesn't this sound like a trip you'd like to take?
Kind of, in a weird way. Like, I'm an adventurer too,
Oh my
so I
God.
get it.
I have to
I'm
stop
just
myself.
wondering how you kept going.
I'll
How
tell you, I have to stop myself every now and again because I do wonder sometimes how I managed to navigate that
it's
in
the
the
power
middle
of
of
the
nowhere.
mind. Yeah.
Power of the mind and the power of surrender.
Wake and Wander, Episode 1. My guest today is Sunniva Sorby. In her life, Sunniva has been to Antarctica more than 100 times. Her most famous journey came in 1993. She was a part of the first female team to ski to the South Pole, a journey of more than 700 miles. To hear Sunniva tell the story is pretty incredible considering she never anticipated this was a journey she was going to take, and it ended up to be quite an unpleasant journey for most of it. So we're going to talk to her about that. Later, we discuss the rise of tourism in the polar regions. It's becoming a bit controversial. Some people say tourism can help. Some people say it can hurt the regions. We'll discuss that. We'll also get into some of Sunniva's other adventures, such as when she lived in a remote cabin in Norway for 19 months. This podcast will be talking travel, talking to guests from all over the world. Let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning. You mentioned earlier that when you were 10 years old, you wrote a letter to NASA, and I'm wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yes, I did disclose that little known fact. For some reason, when I was little, I always wanted to go to outer space. And I might have confided that in my teacher at the time, and she encouraged me to write a letter, a very appealing letter to NASA, and she mailed it for me, and I got a form letter back from NASA, which was amazing and unpredicted or unexpected. And they basically told me to stay in school, which today makes me laugh because they said they would at some point send a civilian into space to stay in school, study science.
Do you remember why you wanted to go to space as a young kid?
I don't really. I just remember growing up, I was just very curious about other places and other dimensions.
Since now you're an adult, I read that you have been to Antarctica 100 times. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously you did end up going to far and away places. You haven't made it to outer space yet, but you're still young, so who knows. How did you embark on that journey? Take us briefly from your time as a kid wanting to go to outer space and having that dream. You said, okay, I'm not going to outer space, but I'm going to explore this planet to its far reaches. Tell us about that.
I think what I've always done is dreamed big and started small. It's probably the reason it took me a really long time to even write a book, which is still sitting in the drawer.
It's not published yet?
No, the book I wrote is not published, and it's that whole, non-willingness to completely be transparent with ourselves. And I digress, but if I go back, when I was younger, I've always played outside. Both my parents are born in Norway. I was born in Norway, grew up in Canada. And skiing and hiking and just being outside was just what we did. And my parents never clipped my wings, thankfully. They never agreed with all the choices I made, but they never stopped me. And if I fast forward the track a little bit, I was in Norway as a computer programmer for a bank, and I'd bought my first place. I had a partner. I was living a great life, gone every weekend exploring Norway, which is an absolutely beautiful country. And there was a part of me on the inside that was soul starved. I don't know how else to call it. But I was just thinking, is this it? Job, you got the career, you have money in the bank, you've got your own place, you have a great relationship, your family and friends are around. But something was missing. And I didn't know what that was until I went to Canada on my yearly pilgrimage to visit my mom, who was living in Montreal. And I always go to an outdoor store. And in the outdoor shops, I'm probably just looking around like at all the fun things that maybe a backpack makes you dream of hiking a trail somewhere. And I find a brochure for an outdoor leadership school in Canmore, Alberta. And the school was called Yamnuska Mountain School. And I went back to Norway and I took this pamphlet with me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it because what they were offering was no certificate or anything. It was just 4.5 months of learning how to be an outdoor leader. Glacier travel, rock climbing, ice climbing, whitewater canoeing, caving, and basically over that course of that time, you will be put through the test and be proficient enough to be able to take people into the outdoors. So I quit my job, and everybody thought I was nuts. My family was just, you're going there to do what? And what are you going to get from it? Are you going to get a diploma? That's why I started by saying there's no certificate. What proof? I mean, what is it? How will this help your career? And I didn't know how it would help my career. I just knew that it was something to add to the bank that I was as a woman. And I went on this course, and it was the best time of my life. I met people that I'm still in touch with from Canmore, Alberta, and I went to California after that. I didn't go back to Norway. Went to California and somehow found myself in Orange County and got a job working at an outdoor store called Adventure 16. It was a wilderness and travel outfitter, and I worked my way up, and I became then a little apprentice for rock climbing and backpacking and high Sierra camping, and then backcountry navigation. And I learned all of these things well enough to teach them. And so that became my life for about 4 years in my 20s. And I'll never forget living with my good friend John Allen in my camper. I had a 74 Westphalia, an orange pop top. And John and I, he was my boss, and we were just like brothers and sisters. We were so close and climbed together and worked together. And we ended up living in my camper for the summer, spooning because it was quite small. We didn't have a romantic relationship. We were just great buddies. And it was his girlfriend thought it was just nuts that we were doing that. But we had a full-time place for the months before the summer where we lived together in a regular little condo. And then the people who owned it came back and wanted that for the summer. So we stayed in my camper. Anyway, it was just a really beautiful time in my life where you're building friendships and your tribe, your people that are the community of support system. They're the ones that are encouraging you to stretch higher, fly more. And I think that time in my life really shaped me to want to pursue other things. And I found myself at the age of 30 managing an outdoor store with 16 staff and being really good at my job and really thriving with the community I was in. And this is in San Diego, California. And then a friend of mine who was writing a story for a newspaper called Adventure 16 told me about the first team of women that were going to ski all the way across Antarctica. And she was interviewing them for the publication. And she said, Anne Bancroft, the expedition leader, told me in confidence that they were missing a fourth person. And I didn't even think twice about anything. I just was listening, going, why are they skiing across Antarctica?
Okay, so you didn't get chills of like, that's me at that time.
You know what? It's funny. I didn't even give myself permission.
What do you mean by that?
That's a funny thing, and I think a lot about that now, is there was nothing in my world at that time, including my own self-talk, that enabled me to go to that place where I thought that could be me.
Really, even after giving up your life in Norway, it sounds like you gave up your job, your relationship, you had this courage and calling to just give it all up and go.
Yep.
Even after that?
Even after that.
Wow. Why do you think that?
Well, I'll tell you about when I did let it sink in and thought it would be me, is when Deborah, who's the editor of the paper, said, when I heard that they were looking for a fourth, I thought of you. And I looked up at her almost as if she was foreign from outer space. And I said, why did you think that could be me? And she goes, because you just have everything that it takes to do something like that. And I'm like, wow.
That's a nice thing to say.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of something that I have shared with other people, how important it is to be mindful of what you tell people and how you encourage them. Like, our words are really, really powerful, especially in today's world. We can either deflate somebody. We can either take them, reduce them to their knees by what we say, or we can elevate them to the greatest heights with a compliment or an idea or a vision we might have of them. And at the age of 30, she gave me that.
What a gift.
I'll say. And then the problem was, after that, I spent 2 weeks letting that idea go from the head, which, it can scramble around there for as long as it wants. But if it starts to go into the body and seep down into your heart and into your mainstream of your veins and your whole spirit system, sometimes it gets so big, the idea gets so big that you have no option but to fulfill the idea, right?
Is that what happened to you in Norway? You said you had this wonderful life. Everything was great as far as people looking at you externally could see. Did you feel there was something missing and something more you were called to do?
Yes. Yeah. Great way of pulling those threads together. Yes. And I think that the thing that I was feeling called to do was, I love the natural world because, even being born in Norway, even though my parents emigrated to Canada, that was where I found myself. I didn't find myself in a classroom. I didn't find myself in little groups with people. I wasn't never a groupie. I was always very friendly. We moved so much in Canada, like every year, so I had to make new friends. But I found my comfort in the space of those wide open places. And I take after my dad in that way. So I think one of the dreams I had, maybe unrequited or unacknowledged at the time when I left Norway, was that I wanted to be competent enough and confident enough to be able to take people outside.
So take us to the day that you decided that you were going to go to Antarctica, or that you had this opportunity to join the ski team.
I was in big trouble then because I was like, oh, shit.
Oh, it's okay. You can say whatever you want.
Okay, because that's what's probably going to come out.
Yeah. Oh, you can say whatever you want.
I had responsibilities, right? And I'm thinking, well, I have to say something to Anne Bancroft. So it was a pre-internet, so I sent her a fax.
Did the journalist introduce
Nope.
you, or you just cold turkey reached out?
She didn't tell Anne about me. She gave me her phone number.
Okay. And how far had you skied at this point in your life? Because how far is it to the South Pole?
It was 700 miles.
And at this point, what would you say the longest you have skied was?
And I think that although that is a really relevant question, it's kind of irrelevant to the kind of thing we were doing down there, because it wasn't even how far I'd skied. It's that I had never really been alone, like on trips by myself. So I hadn't really explored the inner inventory of my mind and where my breaking points are.
Yeah, it's like the other side of it. There's the physical side,
Yeah.
but then the internal mental battle when you're trying to push through something like that.
That's it. But I was for certain going from the minor leagues to the major leagues overnight. I was really, really clear about that. And so I sent Anne Bancroft a fax. I was in the outdoor industry. I said, hey, I heard about you and the team that are trying to ski across the entire Antarctic, 1,500 miles. I heard about you through Deborah doing the article, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm really interested in what you guys are doing, and if I can do anything to help. I thought maybe I could get them sleeping bags, or I could get them some gear, but I didn't admit that I thought, could I be interviewed for the team?
You're kind of fishing a little bit.
I just putting it out there.
Open the door up a little
nervous.
bit.
I was just really nervous. I mean,
700-mile ski.
Well,
yeah.
It was supposed to be 1,500.
Wow.
Nervous, and maybe not. I'm certainly not overly confident about that. And so she sent me a fax back and said maybe we could speak on the phone. And it was a long time before I got the phone call from her. And I remember being at the shop in A16 in Solana Beach. And there's only one person that I worked with, her name's Shelby, that I said, Shelby, if someone by the name of Anne Bancroft calls, you come and get me. I don't care where I am. And so 2 weeks go by, and that's a long time when you're living and breathing, thinking that your alignment arrow is showing up and you're not quite sure if it's going to be launched. You know what I mean? I was becoming almost obsessed with feeling like this is the next thing I need to do. Shelby comes up to me, and I'm helping fit somebody with a backpack, and she goes, Sonny, Anne's on the phone. So I said, Okay, here you go. Shelby's going to take over, and I go upstairs because there was a log cabin for an office, and I had 100 questions, almost literally 100 questions on a notepad that I wanted to ask her. Didn't get to any one of those questions. We had a great chat, went for 2 hours, and fast forward, I was flown to Minnesota, which is where she was based, and the other two were. And I was in a very, very intense interview to do a self-inventory. Who are you? What are you good at? What are you not good at? Why do you want to be part of this? And what do we need to know about you? It was the first time I did a complete self-inventory.
Did you have the answers to all those questions?
I was just honest. But it was a very humbling experience because it's not like going into a job interview, you know? Yeah, I have 7 of those 10 requirements, and saying you have 10 of those 10. You know, this is
It's life or death.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I took the words out of your mouth.
No, it's pretty much spot on. It's kind of life or death. So you just, we're not often in those situations in our world, are we, where we have to be completely transparent and honest with who we are and who we're not.
In fact, we're used to embellishing our
Right.
experience and what we've done in terms of a typical job interview.
That's it.
Right.
Absolutely, especially women.
Well, it's good you were self-aware. I mean, that was probably something Anne appreciated, that you recognized the gravity of the situation.
She did, and I told her, I said, if there's one thing I have going for me, it is this self-awareness that I know I won't quit. And that can serve you well and also not serve you well.
So what did she say?
I had 3.5 days in Minnesota of pretty intense interviews. The press were around. We were packing food. I was 4 months away from leaving for the Antarctic. I didn't know that I was going to be given the green light, but this is how close it was to the actual departure.
They were leaving 4 months from then.
Right.
So did you feel like you needed an answer because you needed to train or get your body ready?
There was nothing I could do physically to prepare more than I had prepared up until that point. I was running marathons and I was pretty fit. I soon came to discover that was the least of my problems. It was up to the 3 of them to decide whether or not Sunniva was a good fit, because 4 different personalities, and it's very clear that of the 4 of us, Anne Bancroft and myself were the 2 extroverts, and Sue Giller and Anne Dalvera were the 2 introverts. They had been preparing for this expedition for 5 years, and they had a long list of alumni that came and went for various reasons. Some of the women wanted to have children, and one of the big challenges was fundraising. They couldn't get a corporate sponsor to sign on to the expedition.
Why not?
They didn't think that we looked the part. I'm the tallest of the 4 of us.
How tall are you?
5'6".
Does that matter? Does height matter?
It was perception. We were going into a very male-dominated domain. Exploration has been changing and has changed a lot over the decades, but at that time it was just no women had even attempted this. And so literally in a boardroom, one of the men came up to Anne Bancroft and squeezed her arm, like in passing by. What makes you think you can do this?
Really?
Squeezed her bicep, and very patronizing. And there's small, subtle experiences that she had around this sort of behavior. And then it became the largest grassroots expedition of its time. We had kids from around the U.S. that raised money by, collecting it in a pillow. And it was so heavy with pennies that they put it in a wheelbarrow when we were about to leave. And this is in Minnesota. They wheeled the wheelbarrow into the classroom where we were giving a speech in front of the whole gymnasium, and they presented us with their pennies. And it's just heartwarming.
That's so sweet.
It was so sweet, and we had the average donation was $25, and we raised $600,000.
Wow. Who helped? Did the media help spread the word of this?
The media helped spread the word. The media wasn't always friendly, but the media helped spread the word.
They were pessimistic, or
just pretty skeptical. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, and we didn't have social media and stuff, so you're saying you're going to do something, and people are having trouble looking at you, believing that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And so it was just a matter of us getting to the ice, and we knew that we would succeed.
What was the major costs associated with it? $600,000. Did you spend all that on the expedition? Was it mostly on getting down there, transportation?
It's insurance and transportation.
Oh, insurance.
Yeah, it's $60 for every pound of anything you're shipping. And we're 4 of us. We each have a 200-pound sled. with our equipment. Fuel is another cost. Fuel, all our equipment. Mostly it's expenses to get down to the Antarctic and support for evacuation.
Before we talk about the logistics of the trip, I wanted to pick up on something you said about this being an all-female trip. That was an important thing, I'm guessing, in the
Absolutely.
cause of this, right?
Yep.
And did Anne come up with that idea? She wanted to be the first female?
It was Anne. She is the first female to reach the North Pole with Will Steger's team in 1986. That was an international team. And she really wanted to, with the support of Will, put together an all-female expedition. It was sort of time for women to crack the ice ceiling up down here, I should say.
Yeah,
And
we're in Antarctica right now, by the way.
absolutely.
We buried the lead on that one. And this was 1993, right?
Right.
That this was happening. I'm reading this book by Sarah Wheeler. She's a British writer and a polar explorer. She's
Terra Incognita.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great book.
Mhm.
Fascinating. And she has an interesting section on here. I was reading some to Neve on the plane about females in Antarctica and how traditionally, when the continent was being discovered in the 19th century and early 20th century, it was like no go for females. It was like an all male thing. And the USAP, the U.S. Antarctic Program, that started in 1959 when the Antarctic Treaty was signed. And the first two females didn't winter at McMurdo Station, the American base, until 1974. And the U.S. was so concerned about these two females going in terms of being a distraction to the men that of the first two females, one was a nun and the other one, quote, was mature, which meant, at least they hoped, that past the age at which she could inflame the passions of even the most desperate men.
Ouch.
Right? Now, when you hear that, what do you think of that?
Well, it is just a part of our history, isn't it? Especially down in Antarctica. You look at the early female explorers around the world. They have done many things, but often disguised as men, just to do what they want to do. And I actually have a book here, Ada Blackjack, that I'm reading now about. It's an incredible Arctic story. But many women have often been either completely dismissed from the written narrative or have been completely underestimated, undervalued, underexposed.
It seems like they saw women as only capable of being a distraction, not capable of contributing. But, if they go down there, they're going to mess up everything.
Yeah, absolutely not.
But that's more of a reflection on men not even being able to control ourselves, I think.
Maybe.
Right?
There could be that too.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting way to look at, our world even today, that we are, whether we admit it or not, we discriminate against genders and races.
Well, we'll come back to the importance of that after we see the end of your journey. But take us to the day that Anne finally tells you you're going to join. How long before your departure was that when you finally figured it out?
Sitting out in the backyard in Minnesota with the three of them, they basically said, "We're giving you the green light. We want you to be the fourth team member on the AWE team." And I flew home, and it was just my whole world was upside down.
How long before the departure was that?
4.5 months. And I had a list of things I needed to get. I enlisted my friends to help me, and it was chaos. I had to give my boss a letter of resignation, and I remember writing it up and arranging a meeting with him in his office. Go into the office, I sit down, and his name's John D. I said, "John D, I need a leave of absence." He goes, "Okay, where are you going?" I said, I'm going on a little ski expedition." He goes, "Wow, are you going to Mammoth?" I'm like, "No, I'm going to Antarctica." And it was a really funny story. He loves to share that one. But basically, they gave me a leave, and they invited me back anytime. The whole company was behind me. They were so excited, because part of what they like to do is groom all the outdoor people and then send them off on their own journeys. So I was a great example of that.
I would think the outdoor industry was more supportive of that departure than the people in Norway of your original move to Canada.
I think so.
I think so.
I
That makes
think
sense.
so.
What did your friends and family back in Norway and Canada think that when you told them that you were going to ski to the South Pole?
Of course you are.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
By now they had caught on.
I don't know. I've always been a very curious and courageous person, and I've always been one to say yes, especially if I trust somebody or if I'm resonating with something or a place. I've not been one to hold the obstacles as the thing facing me. It's more of like, there's a door open. or there's a crack in the door.
Do you remember the flight down to? How did you get down to the Antarctic? Did you get to
yes.
South America and then sail, or did you fly all the way down?
Yeah, great question. We flew from Minnesota down to Buenos Aires, and then Buenos Aires to Punta Arenas.
In Chile?
Yes, and then we were stuck there for more time than we expected or wanted.
Weather?
Couldn't fly over the Transantarctic Mountains to get to Patriot Hills, which is 80 degrees south. And so while they were all really pissed off about that, I was happy because I'm a newbie. I'm the new person on the team. I'm checking out all the clothing and fixing last-minute things. There's all sorts of things that needed to be Antarcticized, right, for the expedition. And I didn't have any of that time to do that at home.
What are you, like, sewing holes in your clothes? Or
you're sewing extra flaps. You're making, like, these things to protect your nose from frostbite and the wind. And gear has evolved 30 years, you know. This is 30 years ago. But back then we had to make a lot of things. I had a bomber hat from A16. I still have, which was fantastic.
So if you had gone on time, you wouldn't have had some of this stuff?
That's right.
Oh, my God. Well,
Yeah.
I bet you were pretty happy then.
I was very happy.
Yeah. So how long were you delayed?
2 weeks. And then when we finally got to Patriot Hills, we had to open up our big 33-gallon, Rubbermaid brutes that had holes drilled in the lid with screws so the lid wouldn't fly off. That was going to be our resupply and our food for the trip. And so we had to go through everything and take out the cheese and some food that went moldy. And where do you get...
You don't?
Nah.
Yeah. So each of you were pulling 200 pounds of supplies?
Right.
Or the sled itself was 200 pounds?
Each sled was 200 pounds with our food, fuel, tents, group gear, and then our personal stuff.
Do you remember the day you shoved off? And
I
you
do.
left? Take us through your mindset.
Wow. I remember the pilot on board, his wife. It was a DC-9. It was called the Ice Princess. And when we landed on the blue ice runway, the plane comes down and it lands, and it's like hummocked. It's like landing over a golf ball of ice, right? All these divots, and it lands, and then it spins around 180 degrees to come down and slow down. And she put her arm around me. She probably heard that the Sunniva's on board. She's new, but she just said, her name is Pat, and she just said, "Dear, when you land, when you get off the plane, just stand there for a second and feel this place." And I'll never forget that. I didn't do it right away, but I did it within the few minutes because there was a flurry of stuff going on. It was Ranulph Fiennes and Mike Stroud from the UK trying to do studies on starvation, and they were two guys skiing across the entire continent. There was Erling Kugge, a Norwegian who was attempting to be the first to ski solo to the South Pole. And there was a Chinese group and a bunch of other scientists. It was crazy.
Bunch of crazy people.
A bunch of crazy people from around the world. Who knew? It was nuts, actually. And so I remember just feeling really stressed and anxious. And we started skiing. And I think we skied that day for maybe 4 hours. And then we stopped and put up the tents because it was super, super windy. They almost didn't fly us to the start of the glacier or the ice cap because it was too windy.
You were on the polar plateau at that point, right?
We were at 80 degrees south, not quite on the plateau.
But was the trip relatively flat?
No.
No.
You think it's flat. And I keep joking, they lied to me. But you're skiing uphill to the South Pole. You start off at about 3,000 feet, and you're skiing up to 9,700 feet, which is more like 11,000 something because of the ice.
Wow.
Yeah, and
so
it's
just
dry.
A gradual uphill the whole way.
And slowly, as you get up there, you're sucking wind. The higher you go.
So what became your daily routine in terms of you wake up in the morning, you're in your tents, how long to pack up and go?
Probably takes about 2.5 hours to pack up.
2.5 hours?
Yep. Well, to get everything ready. So you wake up at about 6 o'clock. One person's on duty. You rotate. One person is on duty to cook breakfast. The other person is getting, personal gear and stuff together. You have breakfast. Then you're packing up all the gear. And it's from the time you wake up to the time you leave, it's probably 8:30 in the morning. And you hope the other tent's on schedule too.
Everyone had their own tent?
We had two tents. Two people in each tent, and we rotated a tent partner every 8 days. So you had a fresh face.
Just so you can... That makes sense.
Oh, joy.
If you've ever shared a tent with someone for one night, you understand that for sure. What were you guys having for brekkie?
Usually oatmeal.
I mean, I had to
Lots
assume
of
you
butter.
guys would have to consume so many
We
calories.
ate 6,000 calories a day.
And what was mostly that of? Were
Like
you eating more of the runners, protein bars, goos, like, or real food?
none of that stuff. Partly because it would all be frozen and pretty hard to eat, especially on the go. But we had, put a lot of food, cheese sticks and things in our pocket when we were on the road, and that would be stuff that was closest to our body so it could be warm. Butter,
Just butter?
sticks of butter.
You just eat a stick of butter?
Oh, I loved it.
Did you have to train to do that? Wouldn't that upset your stomach?
That no, I mean after a while your body gets used to consuming 45% of your diet, which is fat. It was really important for us, but it wasn't something that was customary for either one of us early on.
Would you just eat it like a candy bar?
Well, sometimes just cut off a little piece and then eat it, or put it in my hot chocolate, or put it in everything you were eating.
Just mix it in.
Just butter. It's the
Yeah.
highest caloric content per weight that you can have, next to something called cestacol, which was a powder. And there was didn't weigh very much, and it had an extra 120 calories in every teaspoon. And I had to really load up because of the 4.5 months I had to get ready and all the stuff I had to do. I lost a lot of weight. I lost like 5 pounds, and that was not good before I left. And so I was already shrinking down to almost. I lost in the first couple of weeks. I lost too much weight, and so I was really trying to pack on
Were you eating dehydrated meals too?
dehydrated meals mostly, and we had some. We had a lot of like pork sausages and things like that. We had some bread, that fiber bread, that we fried with butter, cheese. We had soups, we had pastas, we had rice, free-dried, vegetables, anything with color.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you manage your water? Wouldn't it freeze?
It would freeze, so we had a thermos. We each had a thermos, and that was the only hot water we had.
My God. And so you're just skiing.
We were dehydrated a lot,
I
actually.
bet so.
Yeah,
Because a lot of people don't realize Antarctica is the driest continent on the Earth.
it
right?
is. Yeah. And the higher up you go, I mean, every one of my fingers on the side was cracked. My lips were cracked. My hair was frozen and then cracked. It's just, it's not pretty.
How many miles a day would you ski?
10 to 14 miles a day.
And what were you thinking about while you were doing it?
You're trying to get inside my head.
That's why we're here.
Oh my God.
35 minutes wasn't enough to butter you up for that one, I guess,
No.
right? Okay,
You know,
you don't have to share if you don't
No,
want.
I'll
but
share. It's kind of interesting. You think about all sorts of things. You think about the things that you are not proud of, that don't leave you, that sort of you don't have a distraction from the thought when it comes to you, and so you're faced with it, and then it rolls around in your brain, and then you find a way to just reconcile that one thing. I thought a lot about. I love building things. I love going to hardware stores. So I literally found myself with an empty shopping cart in my head, running up and down the aisles of a hardware store, collecting very specific things for what I needed to build something. And that actually was amazing.
as a distraction.
As a distraction, and also as a way to look forward to something when I came back. I'm going to make that. Or a dinner I'm going to make for my friends when I get back.
I bet you thought about food a lot.
Oh, I upset. That was a nonstop thing. Is like food. That's all we all dreamt about food.
Was there ever a point where you thought that you wouldn't make it?
Mm-hmm. There was actually.
I'm imagining bad weather storms and just days you didn't want to get up.
There was that, but I have to tell you that even though I was the youngest on the expedition, I thought I was the fittest. I had the most problems. Very early on, I had tendonitis in both my ankles because we had these double plastic mountaineering boots with wooden skis with the heel lift, and we're always moving and walking at an angle. So we're leaning forward all the time, mostly because we're in headwinds, but also because we have a really heavy load. That's the only way to keep momentum, is lean forward. And the stress that put on my feet and made it such that my ankles were blown up like elephant, stumps. And I had to eat 2 800 milligram tablets of ibuprofen in the morning for the swelling to go down so I could put my feet in my boots.
Just to get in.
Just to get in.
Oh, my God.
Oh my God. And what happens then, we know if you take too much of that, it's going to impact your stomach lining, and you get sick from that and you lose your appetite. So I started losing my appetite. And then almost simultaneously, or maybe a couple of weeks after, I got grapefruit-sized knot in the back of my neck. So I couldn't actually lift my head up to see because it was so painful. And that was from pulling the sled. We all had our issues, but I couldn't do the two things I was supposed to do: ski and see. Very literally.
So how did you shake those burdens?
It just became worse. I ended up getting very bad bronchitis because I must have gone down with some bacteria. And then I ended up getting systemic edema, which is where your whole body swells up. And my face was swollen. Doesn't this sound like a trip you'd like to take?
Kind of, in a weird way. Like, I'm an adventurer too,
Oh
so
my God.
I get it.
I have to stop myself.
I'm just wondering how you kept going.
I'll tell you, I have to stop myself every now and again because I do wonder sometimes how I managed to navigate that in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Power of the mind and the power of surrender, really. My mind was trying to control everything, and when I was so sick, and when I say I couldn't do the two things I was supposed to with the bronchitis, I wasn't getting enough oxygen into my body. And my feet were a mess, and I was slowing down. And this is not a good thing when you have like a ship to catch at the very end, because we were attempting to go all the way across. And that last ship is going to leave February 14th from McMurdo. And sayonara, if you're not on that ship, you're staying at McMurdo with, which wasn't an option. And so I am now at a place 4 weeks into the trip, which was 2.5 months long, where I cannot breathe properly, and I can't move properly. My eyes in the morning were swollen shut with kind of that crust on the eyelids, where I literally had to take my pinky fingers and kind of open up my eyelids so I could see in the morning. It was unbelievable what my body went through. I ended up crying for 3.5 days straight in the comfort of my own glacier glasses that had side shields, because as Anne Bancroft calls me, she's a very proud person. Growing up Norwegian, you're proud. And I didn't
You didn't want people to see.
No, I didn't. It was my own little suffering. And so I eventually got to a place where I was just like, this is fucked. I just need to let go of my ability to think I can even control anything about myself right now. I can't. And so I asked for help. I honestly, just in my own private little piece of real estate that I am, I asked for help out there, for any sort of sign. And I started to see things differently out there. I started to see things. I wasn't seeing anything up until that point except my own suffering. And then I saw the light shining on the snow, which to me then turned into little diamonds and ice crystals. And I wrote a lot about this. It was a very spiritual experience for me.
I bet. Sounds like you were halfway to the afterlife. Many times.
maybe that's true. But it's when I realized that I wasn't kind of carrying myself alone at that point, then it was easier for me to kind of give up part of my load.
But you made it.
I made it.
Spoiler alert, you made it.
Yep.
Tell us about arriving at the South Pole.
14 hours before we got to the South Pole, which is a full day. We can see the South Pole, and Sue Giller is very excited because she's the navigator, and she's like, yay, I made it. I got us to the South Pole, because there's nothing to give you any markers for anything. You've got a GPS that you need to triangulate, and you have to match it with the map, which has a 37-degree declination from geographic to magnetic south. So we have to readjust our compasses every time we're traveling with the lead person. So that was a big deal, and we're maybe now 2 hours away, and we can hear the sound of something. And snowmobiles are coming toward us. And they came out from the South Pole because in their binoculars, they were like, the women are coming, the women are coming. They were all excited. And we were just kind of in our own little zone. It was a long day. We get there January 14th, 1993, and it was minus 76 degrees Celsius. And we get there, and everybody came out of like all the buildings. There were about 125 people there. And they came out and they were like, congratulations on reaching the South Pole. It was so, so surreal. And we took pictures around the Barber Pole, which is not the real South Pole. And then we took pictures around the geographic South Pole. And we thought there's only going to be one special South Pole. And then we look and there's a row of South Pole markers because the ice sheet moves 3 to 10 feet a year.
Yeah, I heard that. So they have to move it every year, right?
Yeah.
The marker.
Yes.
Yeah, that's insane.
It was crazy. And we took pictures and, yeah, we went in and they invited us in for dinner. They had already closed the kitchen, but they opened it up and made food. And then I'll never forget sitting across from Anne, and everybody's inside the galley. And she had a beer, and I could tell she was kind of fading away a little bit. And I remember just reaching over and grabbing her and saying, Anne, let's go outside, because I thought she was going to fall asleep right there. And so we went outside, and then she and I took some photos, and she thought she was going to get a sponsorship with American Express. So she took some little photos of her next to the South Pole sign, shop till you drop.
Oh, my God.
It was hilarious. So humor was one thing that really carried us through, for sure.
Yeah, you guys must have been delirious at that point.
We were.
And did you stay down there for a while before you came home?
We stayed down there 4 days. We were in our tents outside of all the main buildings and got some great tours of the place. Some people gave us their tokens for a shower, which was amazing. And I'll never forget. Now I don't know why I just thought of this right now, but sitting on a toilet seat for the first time, I got a cramp in my hamstrings and I couldn't get up. And I had to hold onto the sidewalls of the stall to help me get off the toilet seat, because your body is just wound up tighter than the Swiss watch from all the, 700 miles, right? And I lost 15 pounds. We all thought, let's call Jenny Craig.
Hey, you want to lose weight?
Hey, we got
Ski to
the
South
program
Pole.
for you.
That's right. Well, another logistical question, like for bathroom on your way there, were you guys using wag bags and stuff like this to?
Nothing like that. We just we had shovels and we just dug a pit. We took all of our waste back with us and recycled everything. But in terms of our human waste, we left that there. That was just not, it was just not
practical. Hey, it might still be there. Might be frozen.
It's found its way slowly, maybe towards the Southern Ocean.
We don't have to go far into that. That's okay.
That's right.
Yeah. So you came back a Canadian hero, a Norwegian hero, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Did people, because before the trip everyone was skeptical, people were like, oh, wow, they did it.
Yeah, the media was all over us. That was for certain. We came back to a throng of press and kids at the airport in Minnesota. And I'll have this image forever imprinted in my mind, because these kids were all given flowers to give us, carnations. And I just remember some of them coming up to me and handing me a little bouquet. But by the time they got shuffled through the crowd of people, the heads had been all cut off. So it was just like this stack of green. It was just so priceless. Then we had a little press conference there, and it was the first time in my life that I heard that my father was proud of me, because he was living in Norway. And in Norway, Norwegians are good at everything. It's almost assumed that, yes, they will be the first to do this, the first to do that. But I grew up in Canada, even though I was born in Norway. And so my father was interviewed by the press, and he shared how proud he was of me. So that became front page news on they call it the Tønsberg-blad, the newspaper in the town that I was born in, which was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
That was amazing. And then there's all kinds of stuff with my high school and other places. All these little stories fold in, and it was fun.
Now, that was in 1993. You had many adventures in the next 2 decades, but we got to skip forward a little bit because of time. But last time you were in the news was during COVID, because you were living in a cabin in Norway, and you were doing some citizen science up there, correct?
Yes.
And your plan was to be up there for 9 months, but then you got stuck up there during COVID for another year.
Right.
Tell us how that experience came about and what you were doing up there.
Yeah, and since the South Pole expedition, I have been in and out of the polar regions as in various capacities, as a working on board in operations.
An ambassador.
No, I've been literally working on board the ships. I was been a historian. I've been a lecturer on different expedition vessels over the course of the years. I've been working as head of operations for a company. And then most recently, before going up to the Arctic, I was head of global sales for a polar operator. But I've also had different corporate jobs, working with a company called Catalyst, had my own travel company for a long time, and all these various jobs. But the thread that has connected my heart to every line of latitude and longitude has been the Arctic and the Antarctic. In some way, that's been sort of Sunniva's evolving story. So I am now finding myself in Alaska at the Adventure Travel World Summit.
We found out we were there together.
Right.
Yeah, but we didn't meet, I don't believe.
Well,
yeah.
we were destined to meet here on board HX's trip, right? So there I am in Alaska, and I am representing a polar operator down here, polar latitudes, and Hilda was currently working with what was then Hurtigruten Expeditions, which is now HX. And we met there, and it's a long story around how we met, but we basically, somebody introduced us, and we found out that we both were kind of like polar opposites. I had spent
no pun intended.
Right? No, most of my time down here, most of her time up there. And we met, and we discovered that we were both sort of that same spirit, that same energy of wanting to find out what's behind that curtain, what's behind that little crack in the door, and both very, very competent outdoors people. And we met on that trip, and then we stayed in touch, and I happened to be back. This was in September of 2018, right? Was that 2017 maybe? I think it was 2017.
2017, fall of 2017.
That's right. And then in October, I find myself in Norway visiting my father, who I was very, very close with. And I told her in advance I was going to Norway, and she said, well, I'm going to be down, blah, blah, blah. So we met in Oslo, down by Akebrygge, down by the pier. I'll never forget this, at the restaurant called Olivia. And we both ordered mushroom soup and sourdough bread, and we're sitting there. And this wasn't the first conversation we had, we had talked on the phone, and we knew both of us that we would do something, right? When you meet, you're kind of like your
synergy.
Future expedition mate, right? She starts telling me about this cabin she has access to. And I have no visual, picture in my head when she's talking about this. And she tells me about a dream she has to overwinter up in this cabin. And she wants to know if I want to come and join her. And I'm like, no way. I mean, I can't do that. I have a full-time job. I've got responsibilities. I was really enjoying my work and enjoying the company and enjoying the opportunities I had to meet different agents around the world, because they're all there to support, sustainable travel in the industry, and loved it. Anyhow, maybe I'm revisiting now the problem I had when I was 30.
I was just going to point that out.
With that seed in my head, I'm like, not again.
Off you go again, another sabbatical, quitting the job.
There you go. But that did happen, and so we ended up spending time on the phone, and this cabin became sort of a focal point for a seed of an idea. Her dream was to overwinter in that cabin, and she couldn't do it by herself.
On Svalbard, right?
Yes,
the island
up
of
in Svalbard. Yeah. 140 kilometers from the town of Longyearbyen, at the edge of the Van Kulen Fjord, and the cabin's called Bumsaboo, Little Bear Hut. Uninsulated, no running water, no electricity, built for beluga hunting in 1930. And she wanted to experience the seasons from this remote location, because she had lived up in Svalbard for, at that time, 25 years with her husband. So slowly I start researching, up there, and the cabin, and she sends pictures and what the opportunities are in terms of living there, because it's not set up for anything but like a long weekend trip kind of thing. And I'm thinking, the only way that I can go and do something like that at this point in my life is if there's a good reason. And so we then started talking about what would the reason be that we would do this. And our reason for the two of us seemed pretty simple. Maybe we could share the experience with others, but we didn't know how. And then I am familiar with this guy in Canada who's hosting these online video conferencing calls called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, which we just did. The problem was, how can we get a communication device to be able to make that happen. And then the second part was, well, we're going to be in one place for 9 months. Could there be any science that we could do as citizen scientists? Because the company I was with, Polar Latitudes, was actually, oddly enough, the first company to introduce a full-fledged onboard program around the citizen science. And then in chatting with Hilda, it turned out that HX has been rolling out this too, both the Fjord Fido, the Globe Observer, and some of these other things. So we called these people that we already had sort of access to and literally said, hey, we're going to be in one location for 9 months. Is there anything we can do to add value to the research that you're doing? And it was a resounding yes. And there were a couple, I think, of them, including Kim Holmen, who was head of the Norwegian Polar Institute, that were a little bit dubious about, you say you want to do this, but are you really sure about what's involved and the collecting the data and storing it and all that, And so he was our first kind of, I met him in person at NPI up in Svalbard, but we just were really, really responsible in terms of, if we were going to commit to it, we will learn everything about that the science piece of it.
What were you collecting?
9 projects, 9 ongoing science projects that were all contributing to data on climate change. We were collecting ice core samples. We were collecting phytoplankton samples. We were measuring the density of the salt water and the temperature. We were photographing the aurora for Aurorasaurus. We were taking time lapse of the aurora. We recorded a rocket launch for NASA. We were collecting snow samples. We were collecting algae samples. We were flying a drone in predetermined patterns to measure the surface temperature changes over time. And we were also collecting wildlife observations, specifically reindeer, foxes, and polar bears.
And that your intention was to be there for 9 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic hit, and the ship that was supposed to come get you couldn't come anymore.
Dang that pandemic.
Well, you kind of missed the pandemic.
Well, I mean for everybody else.
We all were back in the real world suffering. You guys were already doing the social distancing. I mean, that must have been tough, though, to be separated from family. And also you had to spend the winter in complete darkness, right?
3 months of complete darkness.
Because you had no electricity.
No electricity. Used solar. We used solar and wind and a windmill for our power. And when you mention that, it's funny. We got dropped off in September of 2019. On board, we had Joss Stone, the musician. She came and played with her brother. Her dad was on board. She had a bass player and a lead guitarist. We had family and friends, and we had all of the scientists that we were collecting data for. They all came. We had, I mentioned the press people. 100 people were on board. What they didn't know, it's kind of funny to say, that they didn't know that they were going to help us offload all the gear for 9 months, including a snowmobile, like an electric snowmobile that we were using from BRP. So we offloaded all this gear. They said goodbye to us, and it's a pretty emotional. It was the Nordstjerne, the North Star ship that was operated by HX at the time, and he pulled out of the bay. And he blew the horn, and everybody's on the ship waving white flags, and we're at the very tip of the point of where we are, away from the cabin, with our dog Etra, who was a 4-year-old Alaskan Malamute Husky blend, and we're just waving, and they take the slow pull out of the bay, and it's like, see ya. And there we were by ourselves for 9 months. And then we find out in March that COVID happened, and because 60 Minutes was supposed to come and do a little thing on us. And the film guy, who we knew, because we recommended somebody to them, he couldn't come. And because he couldn't come, we were starting to wonder a little bit more about those little bits and pieces we were getting from the news. And then our main media person writes and says there's a global pandemic. And I'm like, okay, I understand what that word is, but I can't even imagine what's going on out there. What's going on? And so we had one of our friends at NASA explain from a bacterial molecular level what COVID was and what it was doing to the world and why it shut down. And we were like, Oh my God.
It's really like an apocalyptic film because you don't know at that point whether the whole world is just going to collapse while you guys are up there.
It was so bizarre. All we're hearing about is all these deaths in Italy. That was the first thing that we heard about, and it was just, and all the fear and the emails we were getting from people, family and friends, and then it became really clear that we weren't getting picked up in May.
So how much longer were you there? Another year? A full year?
Well, we rode snowmobiles 8 hours over 2 really pretty hairy glaciers with Etra to get supplies. We went back for another month and had the most amazing non-touristy summer, because normally ships really visit that place. It's a historical site. No activity, just us. So we went running, we trained, we observed wildlife coming back into the flow, and then we decided to go back and visit our families for a little while, and then made the decision to go back for another year. So it was 19 months in total.
And now, after that experience, you've become the quote-unquote grandma. Is that it? Was that the title? No, not grandma. Did I just make the mistake?
You did not call me a grandma.
Wait, what is it?
You know what? I got to go. Well, thank you so much.
I knew I was going to blow it.
Well, Godmother.
Godmother.
Yes.
Sorry. Wow. Okay.
It's okay.
We're friends now, so it's okay, though. You're the godmother of the ship we're on,
yes,
HX.
I'm one of the 2 godmothers.
So how did you go from, what was it like coming back from the cabin, and then how did you get into this role you are now, and why are you doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. When I came back from Bumsaboo, it was 19 months later, and I found myself terribly, changed by the experience, but really uncertain how. And part of that was because I was probably experiencing a certain degree of post-traumatic stress, and it's not the way we would normally equate that to people going into the war, but I came back into a world where people were different, and there was movement everywhere, and everything was easy, and I was not needed. I mean, plain and simple, Like, I'm going from a world where Hilda and I were tight as tight can be. We needed each other to go outside together, we never were inseparable up there for 19 months, 14,000 hours because of safety. And so you develop a real respect and trust in that person. And now I'm coming back to my world, and nobody cares where I am or what I'm doing. Kind of. I don't mean that in a real way, but
I understand what you're saying.
Internally.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I can turn on a switch and do this. So it was a very strange experience to kind of find my way back home.
When you're in the wilderness, every action matters.
Every action.
And everything you're doing is directly related to your future self, right? And here, life is so easy.
It has a consequence out there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't here. And so I think one thing that I'm trying very hard to share in a subtle way, in not hitting over the head with a 2x4 way, but in sharing through my experiences, is that everything we do in our world, even if you're not on an expedition or out in the outdoors, at home, every single thing we do has a consequence. And we haven't realized that until today, 2024, because we see the impacts of subtle choices people have made without maybe even being aware of them. So I've been trying to be that person who shines a little light on, yes, all the bad things that are happening out there, but the ways that we can actually help maybe mitigate them and help give a little bit of more ownership and power to ourselves as agents of that change.
What are some examples, and why did you choose to work with HX in terms of, they have expeditions to the Arctic up north. They also have Antarctic expeditions. Why did you choose that company?
That's a great question, because although, when I was head of global sales, I was familiar with HX. I had only been on the Nord-Norge, one of their ships, the first trips that ship took to the Antarctic, but was with another operator. They had, I was hired as a lecturer on board that ship run by HX, but that was my first experience on board one of their ships. But I wasn't really familiar with the company or the operations until I met Hilda. And she had worked for many years with the company prior to leaving that job going up to the Arctic. I had met many people from the company through my work, have always loved the people. I mean, it's an industry full of people who love what they do. And so when I came back from the Arctic, I was invited to join a Zoom call with Hilda and the then CEO of the company called Daniel Sheldon. The invitation was he had something to tell us. and he's on the call, and I'm sitting now at I was at my sister's place when I was taking the call, actually, on Vancouver Island, and I'll never forget sitting there, and neither one of us knew what he wanted to talk to us about. And he then says, we have spent some time vetting different names and things, but we would like to invite you two to be the godmothers of the MS Fridtjof Nansen. And Hilda's crying, and I'm staring, looking, and wondering, not sure what this means. And so I knew that was a big role, but I didn't really know what it meant. So I honestly put in my little thing under Google what it means to be a godmother, and I see all these royalty names pop up. And then we start having a conversation about what it means. What does this mean for you, Daniel? And he and the team, because they had all sorts of, I don't remember, but I could find out later, all the amazing names they had teed up to be the godmother. And he really wanted a modern explorers to be the face of this ship. And so what an honor, what a real honor. And I feel like traveling in this role is, even as a godmother, is a privilege. But there's also, I feel there's a huge responsibility when we travel to make it relevant and meaningful for other people. And also that we're, trying to figure it out for ourselves. Like, what do we do as people to solve our problems today that seems so insurmountable, so big? And so, yeah, I have been, since being a godmother, I've been on board the ship 3 times, my 3rd time. Love it. Love the team. I'm especially impressed because learning more about this particular ship and the Roald Amundsen, that, there are a lot of companies doing good things around sustainability in the industry right now because it's the right thing to do. There is only one company that I have seen be the first to get to the dance table or the dance floor and lead the way and lead the charge with setting the bar higher in terms of what needs to happen for the entire industry to do the right thing. Our problems today are huge. I've been hanging around scientists and really smart people for 3 decades now, and maybe 2.5 decades. And I'm a good listener, and I understand that we are in a world of hurt as it relates to our planet and the changes, and we can just kind of sail by them if we want. We can drive by them. We can skim the pages of the media that we see and do all that and not be affected and maybe get distracted by all the things we consume. And it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be whatever all those problems are out there that keep us distracted, right? And there are many. Or we can actually choose to be an active participant. And so I am trying to be a better person myself so that I can be even a better active participant in trying to bring other people into the fold and share that, there are companies doing the right thing like HX. They're not perfect, and nobody will be, and we will never solve climate change on our watch. Let's just put that to bed. But let's understand, and you mentioned this earlier, that we as people, we have an opportunity to help shape the future by being really good people today, by sharing not just our example of who we are, but also our energy. I mean, I've met a lot of people trying to do good work out there, but their energy is such that I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. What you do speaks so loudly. That's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Love it.
But I think about that a lot because isn't it true? Like you can feel somebody's authenticity or not?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Especially with the rise of social media and stuff, and it's hard to know who's real about it.
Yeah.
And the way you craft your message matters a lot because that's how it's going to resonate with people and how you're going to connect with people.
Absolutely.
So what do you have planned for yourself in the future now? And in this role, this is only part of what you're doing, coming down here on these ships, you're doing a lecture later, right?
I don't think it's today. Is it?
I don't know. I thought you said you had to go for something later.
Oh, I think I might go on a Zodiac cruise, but I'm having a feeling that that's not happening at the moment. So
oh, it's getting pretty nasty out there.
It's getting pretty nasty.
Yeah, the
out
ice
there.
is getting thicker and thicker. Is this pancake ice?
This is just pancake. Yep. What we're seeing on the surface right there is just all these beautiful heavy snowflakes landing on the surface of the water and just creating this what looks like little pancake ice. It's beautiful.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
that means we have a little more time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm just curious. One of your biggest things is climate change. And when I was hearing you talk yesterday, you talked about the idea of deep listening because some people out there they push back against the idea. I'm sure there's some people that don't believe it's happening. They don't see examples of it, or more likely, people I talk to just humans may be having an impact, but the world changes anyway, and this kind of idea of just, I think you called it apathy, really like, well, what can we do? The world's going to change. So, how do you approach it, and what's the best way? A trip like this, an adventure travel trip, we come down here and we can literally see how the glaciers have receded, or you can see the ice conditions are changing. How do you try to communicate to people and to get them to take small steps in their life to make things better?
Thank you. I'm going to start with like when I first came down here on a ship in 1996, there were about 17,000 visitors down here in a season. And now there are like about 120,000 as of last year.
Wow.
And we were never allowed to talk about climate change.
Allowed.
Yeah,
Like,
it was like
forbidden.
it was kind of like talking about politics. Don't go there. And so even if you were a scientist talking about glaciers and if you're talking about wildlife and the ozone layer at that time, you could talk about the science of it and talk about the changes, but you never made a reference to climate change. It was just a very divisive topic, and people were not equipped to deal with that, and it was just present the science. We have come a long way. But what I think scientists have not done very well, and I'm not saying this in a bad way or being critical, when you're a scientist, you have a very specific way of thinking. And you write about what it is you're researching in a very specific way because it's getting published or peer reviewed or what have you. I don't understand that. And most people don't understand those abstracts. So, what I think has been amazing evolution, and what HX has done really well, is taking that science and creating story around it. That's what citizen science does, is you're able to, and this is what I am doing, is I am the bridge kind of between the science and the general public's understanding of the science by building story around it to give it meaning and deeper understanding so that it's digestible. And I think we need more science communicators out there that are not involved in science, or science communicators that are good at communicating the science. And we're seeing a bigger trend in this, actually, and it's happening more and more, especially on HX trips, and it's happening more in the media. And so those stories inform. I have thought, like a lot of people, that there was a solution here, that maybe there's one way to talk about this. And so I have been a voracious digester of courses and podcasts and all sorts of things to better understand how do I do this, because now I'm on stage. I'm in these public venues with people that are senior level executives wanting the answer from me. Maybe not, and they're not going to stand up in the room in front of all their peers, but they will come to me after and say, so what do you think about, this? I spoke at COP26 on the importance of polar education to inform climate change. And the polar regions are informing us. They are the great warning systems for the world, right? And if we're not looking at this as an example, well, look at what's happening today. And so I took a course in Norway, actually, that was hosted by a woman from India. Her name is Monica Sharma. And she created a course called Transformational Leadership for Climate Change and Sustainability. That's a big title. I figured it had big results. And so I signed up, and it was every 3 months in a row, and every month was 3 days in session. And I was able to attend two of them in person and the one session online. And she has successfully rolled out 21 projects under the United Nations using her model, under that big title I just told you, Climate Change for Leader. And I'm thinking, oh, finally, my blueprint. And I go to this course, I sit there, and this is not at all
A
what
scam? Well, I don't mean in a scam like that, but just it wasn't as deep as you thought it was.
No, it was deeper than I thought
Oh,
it was.
deeper.
You
Okay.
know what it was? It ended up being a course in understanding the scale of how we make change. Personal, business, political. If we can't scale our solution to end up in the political sphere, we're not going to end up having any sorts of scalable change that is mandatory today, at least to meet net zero, which is our base platform. The course started off by kind of help encouraging everybody, because they were professionals. Many of them were from around Norway in various capacities. The question was, who are you? What do you value? Who are you aligning yourselves with? Who are you working with? The course over the 3 months helped us identify our business relationships, our personal relationships, and where we're getting stopped, where we're making progress, and how to scale that out. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but it was a really interesting process, because at that time, Hilde and I had several partnerships, and not all of them were reciprocal partnerships. And reciprocity for me is so important. I don't go into any kind of business or anything as a transaction. I had those days, for sure, where you're delivering something and you get something back and that's it, thank you. But over the years, everything for me has been really about cultivating relationships, and I'm very, very proud of that. And so through this course, we were both able to look at some of our sponsorship partnerships that we had and going, well, that one sucks. I mean, yes, they're doing this for us and we're doing this for them, but we're not building off of anything. And so we ended up cutting ties to a couple of our partnerships as a result of this course, and ended up looking at other opportunities to build off. And HX at the time was one of our partners, and we were like, this is a partnership that's working really well, because we're able to elevate our connection to the sustainability initiatives. And ideally what we wanted to do was to really be spokespeople as a non-employee, because I think it's better for companies to have people from the outside promote what they're doing, instead of coming and promoting what you're doing from the inside, because that's
PR.
It's self promotion, which is kind of a turnoff for a lot of people.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Last question, we can end on this. Thinking about tourism, there's some people that think tourism to the polar regions could be a bad thing because of the environmental impact, but there's also people that think it could be a good thing because of the education it provides people that go there. Where do you see tourism fitting into the education of the polar regions, climate change, and all the above? It's a toughie, yeah?
It's a toughie. It's almost like, should I become a vegan,
Yeah. Do you give it all up, right?
Yeah, because I have, and there are all of these issues on the plate right now, and they're all very siloed. And I think that I'm going to take it back just a second, and then I will answer your question. Sure. I think what matters more than ever today is our choices, and what we value in terms of making those choices. Like, who are you banking with? And are they investing in, carbon emissions? Are they investing in the oil industry? Where are you shopping? What kind of food are you eating? Where does it come from? I know that sounds like a lot of work, but it's work we should all be doing, so that we have a little bit more ownership over the impact we're having, right? We will never stop traveling as a species, not now, probably not ever. I feel, and I've probably shared this already, but I feel like travel is a huge, huge privilege, and not everybody on our planet gets to do that. And we know with even the Chinese group that's on board, and I remember when Chinese tourism first became an opportunity down here, only 5% of the population had passports. And I just use that as an example that it is a real privilege to travel, especially to remote regions like the Antarctic. And I think it's incumbent upon the operators Yes, but it's also really incumbent upon the passengers on board to make really careful choices about who they're traveling with, why they're traveling with, and what do they do when they come home. And I know that sounds like a simple little series of 3 little things you can check off, but not all people will do that. But if the majority can do that, it is a big win. And what that means is before you travel, really do your homework on who the operators are. We can't just go for the cheapest trip, and we can't just go for the cheapest product because that's going to end up in a landfill. Just like the cheapest trip is going to end up throwing, God knows, maybe more carbon emissions in the atmosphere, maybe waste. Who knows? I can't go down that road right now, but making sure you pick somebody that resonates with your values, that has a relationship that you can develop a relationship with.
I always think about it too, because I have broken it down since the beginning of my career. There's 2 types of people, right? There's travelers and there's vacationers.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to go, especially Americans. We have such limited time off. For
Right.
Europeans, it's a foreign concept to just have a week off a year. But, if you have a week off a year, maybe you don't want to go to the polar region and think about climate change. You just want to go to a beach in Mexico and relax, right? But to your point, like some of our travel can be more beneficial than others in terms of our own education, our own thirst for knowledge, our own awareness of things happening. So, of course, take your vacations, relax, enjoy your life. Who am I to tell people what to do? But I've liked to use travel as a vehicle to improve myself. And I love what you're saying in your previous answers, because it reminds me of a quote. It's like, if you want to change the world, start with yourself.
Yes.
And there's many variations of that. And that's the whole concept of a religion, Buddhism, which we talked about before we came on the podcast a little bit. This idea of starting with yourself. So if you are privileged enough to travel, at least incorporate some of your time and some of your travels into not vacationing all the time, but take the time to travel and to really come back with something.
Yeah, and own the responsibility. I know there's an online course that guests can take before they even come on board this trip, and that's never happened before. Just so they can educate themselves about the environment and the ship and everything, which is amazing. And all this, I just want to add this because it's so important. We have to have fun here, people. I mean, there's so much heaviness going on out there, isn't there? There's so much despair and there's so much fear and trauma. We're seeing, Cristiana Figueres, who brokered all the countries to come together and sign the Paris Agreement in 2015. We have post-traumatic stress, which people experience after a trauma's happened. But she shared that we're all experiencing pre-traumatic stress, sort of the notion that there's some impending something happening. And it's in our media,
Yeah, it is, for
and
sure.
so when I think about that, it's like, yes, I'm trying to do the right things, but I am the most perfectly imperfect person you'll ever meet. And I think what matters is that we have to have fun and bring people into the fold with a little bit of spirit and excitement fever and joie de vivre, and have that be the catalyst to create some change and not just force feed someone. That just never works.
Incredible advice. And I've had a lot of fun talking to you. This has been a great conversation.
Likewise.
Thanks
you.
for taking the time. How can people connect with you? Do you do social media?
Yep. And I have I'm going back out on the speaking circuit to speak to kids and corporations. So it's sunnivasorby.com and also heartsintheice.com.
And what's your Instagram?
It's my name.
Okay. I'll share it on the episode profile. And you said you don't have your own book yet, but you've co-authored a book?
We co-authored a book, and it's called Hearts in the Ice. And it's a story of the first 9 months that Hilda and I did up in the Arctic. It's a good book. It's a mix of exploration. It's a mix of our daily routine, some of the dangers we faced, like the 100 polar bears we encountered along the way.
Cool. And there's a lot of media out there about you. I'll share some of the articles too.
Yeah.
And you are the godmother.
Yes.
Of an HX ship, the Nansen. So
Very proud.
Do you publish your schedule of when you'll be on board if people are thinking about coming to Antarctica and would want to be on when you're on the ship?
I don't, but that's one thing I'm going to speak to the leadership team about, see if we can't roll a few things down out in the future, because I have a lot of people that would like to join the ship with me on board.
You should consider organizing your own tours, where people just sign up to come travel with you directly.
Let's work together.
Let's do it. Amen. I'll come back.
Okay.
I feel right at home here. I love it. Thank you so much for the time today.
I really appreciate it. You're the best. Thank you.
Yes, now I'm riding the terrain, flying high up once again. Got my crew sitting healthy and my boo living wealthy. Level 99, never settle in my mind. So I pedal and I climb up the pedestal and find almighty weapon. So I calm lightly step into the castle. Satchel, tackled, wrestled down the corridor where I'm grounded through the floor. Roundhouse into my core, down, out, and through the door. Sword down at my side, I gotta round up and ride. Face boss, break jaws till I take off. Face off, stop and swing my serious strike. This is it, take the title, disappear in the night. To the whole wide world, got the keys to the kingdom overseas. With the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world. Slay the boss in the castle when we cross final battle. Then I walk out, travel to the whole wide world. Got the keys to the kingdom overseas. With the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world.